Well, so we're going to continue our study now by turning to Merleau-Ponty's essay "I and Mind." But before talking about that directly, I want to just go back for a second to what we were just talking about Derrida and his essay "Signature Event Context." Try to bring you back to the themes we were talking about there and use that as a way to launch what's going on in "I and Mind." So remember that the main kind of point we were taking away from Derrida is that whereas we typically think of ourselves as being in possession of ourselves, like we think of ourselves as self-conscious. So we think, oh yeah, I know what's going on in my own mind. You know, that's my own private world where I have access to myself. And we typically think of that self-presence as the source of the meanings we're going to express in language and whatever else. But what Derrida was trying to show is that that things kind of go the opposite way. That in place of that presumed self-presence, right? The reality is that we are much more enigmas to ourselves. Our own reality is a kind of a question. We don't immediately have clear and direct access to ourselves as subjects or minds or whatever other word you want to use. Rather, there is a process of coming to make sense of who we are. And that process is mediated by language or by writing. So language, or writing in other words, is the set of terms that we use to make sense of things. And those are the terms, as Derrida was saying, the sort of reiterable terms, right? So when we make sense of ourselves, we rely on that same set of words that everybody else uses and that we'll use every other time. Right? We turn to those things as our way of articulating what's going on in us. And the terms we use to understand ourselves are then the same terms that we use to understand other people and communicate with other people and so on. The same words that we and those other people use to grasp the world, right? The terms of language become the basic frame of reference for understanding ourselves in relation to ourselves and in relationship to other people, and both of those things in relationship to the surrounding world and so on. And so all of those relationships that in fact are puzzling and enigmatic are made sense of by us by relying on these terms of writing. So writing, in other words, is in a sense what tells us what the meaning of all those things is. But let's go back for a second to that enigmatic character. So again, just basically you and your experience begin in an enigmatic relationship. Like you're kind of saying, what is this? What's going on here? The point I want to make there is that enigma is not something neutral, right? It's in fact our experience, or as Heidegger says, our being in the world. We exist as a kind of question to ourselves, where we don't really know what's going on and how to make sense of this. There's a certain kind of muteness there that we don't really know what to say, so to speak. We don't know what this is, and we are in a way, and we are essentially propelled or motivated to turn that into something. We take that thing that is a question and try to answer it. That's that sense of our existence as a kind of question to ourselves. Maybe that's what you're really experiencing again in the way Heidegger talks in the anxiety that Heidegger talks about, or the authenticity, right? But most of us, most of the time, deal with that question by grabbing on the available terms for making sense of things, right? We repeat the familiar forms of making things meaningful. But I want to hold on to that moment of enigma to see there as the very motivation to write in the first place, the very motivation to find terms for making sense of things. So I guess I want to distinguish them between, in writing, using Derrida's term writing, I want to distinguish essentially between the inscription or the inscribed and the inscribing, between what is written and the writing, or the kind of inaugurating of a system of writing or a system of language. And I want you to think about that idea that there's a way that in our our very being, we're impelled to try to find the way to articulate what we are. And that means articulating ourselves to ourselves. It means articulating ourselves to others. It means our articulating of ourselves to the rest of the world, and so on. And that's the moment that I want us now to focus on, that distinctive moment of the inaugurating of inscription. And that it seems to me, then, I'm going to put a word on it, that's basically how Merleau-Ponty is going to interpret the nature of art. So that's the first point. That's what Merleau-Ponty takes up in this essay. He basically begins by saying that science, which we normally think of as knowledge, the thing that's going to tell the truth about the nature of reality, he says science manipulates things and gives up living in them. And that should be a pretty familiar idea from the things that we said about Heidegger. And in fact, he says the same thing again. He says on page 160, but it's about 4 paragraphs, and he says scientific thinking is a thinking that looks on from above, and it thinks of the object in general. Indeed, he'd said that in that first paragraph. Its fundamental bias is to treat everything as though it were an object in general. So basically what he's saying is that the thing we normally think of as science has taken a step out of engagement with living experience, and has performed that activity of effectively treating the world as an object. Remember, that's what Heidegger brought out right at the beginning with his distinction between what's ready to hand and what's present at hand, with that idea that things become present when we essentially objectify what is otherwise the living fabric of our experience. And that's essentially what Merleau-Ponty is saying too, that science steps out of the lived relationship with things and treats reality as an object. So what he says here is there's something unsatisfactory with thinking of this, what we normally think of as the natural sciences, as knowledge simpliciter, as if they were unambiguously the way that the truth is found. And on the basis of the sorts of things that we've already been seeing with Heidegger and so on, Merleau-Ponty says, on the contrary, if we really want to grasp things the way we are, we have to return back to that original there is, right? The there of Dasein that Heidegger spoke about. So Merleau-Ponty wants us to step away from the developed ways we have of comprehending the world that rely on already having objectified things, and go back to our living experience. Well, in going back to our living experience, he's really trying to do something very much like what I was just saying about writing, right? We want to step behind the familiar terms that we already have for making sense of things, and try to get back to what we might call sort of our original condition, the original condition of experiencing, and to try with fresh eyes to see what that is like, so to speak, before language, before categorization, before the move of objectification, and so on. And what's interesting now is let's look at what Merleau-Ponty says here. He says, scientific thinking, a thinking that looks on from above, must return to the there is which underlies it. And he says, in other words, it must return to the site, the soil of the sensible and open world, such as it is in our life and for our body. So Merleau-Ponty, taking up this project, draws our attention to this, that in a fundamental way, Dasein, who we are, occurs as a body. You can go back and remember that Manet painting we looked at from the very beginning when we were looking at Heidegger. Remember, we were drawing a distinction there between ourselves as an act of experiencing and ourselves as an object looked at. And that remains of fundamental importance. But notice that ourselves as a subject experiencing still means ourselves occupying a position, a specific position or point of view with respect to the world. And in that painting, or in real life, when we see ourselves in the mirror, we see ourselves as a thing in the world, as a body in the world. And while it's no doubt true that the taking that up as an object is fundamentally misleading in ways that we've thought about. What that seeing of ourselves in the mirror also draws our attention to is that we are in the world as a part of it, as bodies, as part of the same fabric as the fabric of things. So the thing Merleau-Ponty wants to thematize, wants to draw attention to, both from the side of ourselves as subjects, as the ones occupying a perspective on the world, and the thing we see when we see ourselves as objects, as one of the things in the world. From both of those sides, he wants to emphasize we're bodies. That is to say, our reality is of the same fabric as things. And so Merleau-Ponty then says we want to get back to that there is, or what at a later point he calls the fabric of brute meaning, right? We want to get back to that. But doing that is going to be, at the same time, grasping something about what it is to be a body, or what we are as bodies. And in any case, he says doing that is what art is going to do, right? So he says on page 161, but art draws upon this fabric of brute meaning. Art, and art alone, does so in full innocence. So he's going to say that's what really makes art art. That's what gives what justifies, in the strong sense, calling something a work of art. It's that it doesn't have some other agenda, but in a fundamentally innocent or original way, it's going to express something about what the very nature of experience or meaningful experience is, what the very nature of the there or of there is. And in particular, Merleau-Ponty is going to talk about the nature of painting. So he says, art, and especially painting, does this. And then he says in the next paragraph, only the painter is entitled to look at everything without being obliged to appraise what he sees. So for the painter, we might say, the watchwords of knowledge and action lose their meaning and force. So I just want to bring that out, right? Our everyday life is a world of making sense of things, getting to know them, and getting things done, right? So knowledge and action are essentially those are essentially the operations we perform in the world as it is already constituted. But remember, we want to get behind that. We want to get to where the world, in the sense of the meaningful experience of myself in relationship to others and in relationship to nature and so on, we want to get a sense of where the world comes from. So we want to go to the spot before knowledge and action makes sense. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to go and talk about the nature of art as the sort of initial inscribing of a kind of writing, so to speak, in the way that Derrida spoke. And in getting back to the there that Heidegger spoke of, we're actually going to be exploring our nature as bodies. Okay, so let's think again just a little bit more about that theme of writing from Derrida. We were talking about how writing makes possible that experience of self-presence, right? Writing, in a way, conceals itself and its agency, conceals what it's doing, and allows you to have this sense that, I'm directly and immediately in contact with myself. So writing makes that experience of self-presence possible and experientially withdraws from it. It's by its withdrawal that it lets you have this sense of being present to yourself. That notion of withdrawal, I'm drawing on the way Heidegger spoke about the ready to hand, right? The tool withdraws from manifest perception to enable you in a way to directly engage with the task. Similarly, writing withdraws from manifest experience in order to allow you to engage with yourself. So in a way, the trick of writing, so to speak, is that it effaces itself. It's a kind of self-effacing process, self-concealing process, It effaces itself and lets you think you just directly have yourself, immediately and all at once. And so it's from writing that we basically develop our belief in that sort of notion of an inner life, right? So, from the beginning, in our study of being in time, we've been sort of battling against the notion of a kind of representational model of consciousness, where we think of consciousness as this sort of inner self-possessed zone. And the point here is, writing is precisely what gives us that illusion, right? But we do have that sense of ourselves as self-possessed, and so with that comes some other things. With that comes the belief of these meanings that are purely internal to that space of inner life that we've now come to sort of believe in, right? And so the notion of the mind that we rely on, that on its own in independence deals with these pure meanings, right? That is built upon that experience of self-presence that is in fact dependent on this kind of writing that conceals its own agency, right? But then that model of ourselves as kind of independent minds brings with it something else too, and that's the conception of the totally alien world from which it's separated. So there's a kind of dualism of mind and body that is the consequence of the self-concealing working of language. But now, what we've seen with Derrida, and what I've been talking about, is the desire to get back to that inaugural moment of writing, which is what I'm calling the artistic gesture and so on. And we've been saying with Merleau-Ponty that that's going to bring us back to the nature of the body as the sort of original experience of there is, from which these sort of false abstractions are generated. But I just want to read you then a sentence from page 176 of I in Mind. I'm going to read you a reasonably long quotation. I'm then only going to focus on part of one sentence, and at some later point I'm going to come back to the other stuff. But so he says on 176, "For the soul, the body is both natal space and matrix of every other existing space. Thus vision divides itself. There is the vision upon which I reflect, and I cannot think of it except as thought, the mind's inspection, judgment, a reading of signs. But then there is the vision that really takes place, an honorary or instituted thought squeezed into a body, its own body, of which we can have no idea except in the exercise of it, and which introduces between space and thought the autonomous order of the compound of soul and body." This is in the context of him talking about Descartes' analysis of vision and so on. And so I don't want to get wrapped up in the details of that at the moment, but I just want to bring out this one line then. This introduces between space and thought the autonomous order of the compound of soul and body. I've been talking about how the very nature of writing is that it essentially pushes us to come to believe in this dualism of thought and nature, or thought and space, as he puts it. The res cogitans and the thinking thing, and res extensa, the extended thing. But Merleau-Ponty is saying, when we analyze this, we see that in fact that dualism rests on another kind of reality that doesn't fit within the dualism, and that is between space and thought, the autonomous order of the compound of soul and body. So that's where we're going to look for, in our phenomenological sense, the body as we actually live it. We're going to look for something that doesn't accept that dualism, that doesn't fall into simply the categories of thought or of space, but rather we're going to find something where those two things which we normally hold apart have to be understood as in some intrinsic way inherently integrated. So that's what I want to go on to talk a little bit about now, the body as a sort of a thinking space, or spatialized thought, for lack of better expressions. So as we turn back to that compound of soul and body that you referred to, we're effectively going to be doing a phenomenology of the body, right? A description of the body as a form of experience, or of how we experience the body. I think I want to make 3 points about that. So the first one is, he says early on in here, you experience the body essentially as your eye can. And I think I spoke about that earlier when we were talking about Heidegger. But whether I did or not, I'll just quickly explain it, right? You can look in the mirror and see your body as an object, but normally the way you live your body is as your ability to get stuff done. When the telephone rings, I can answer it. And that's what it is to experience myself as a body, to experience myself as being able to answer the phone when it rings. When the bus is at the stop and I'm a little too far away, I can run there to get it. If something's going to fall and, hit my son's head and he's not looking, like, I can reach over and grab it or knock him out of the way or whatever, right? I mean, I just want you to think about these kinds of experiences in general. Like your engagement in the world is one where actions are constantly called up from you and you can do them. And that's fundamentally what it means to experience yourself as a body, right? You experience yourself as someone integrated into the fabric of the world in such a way that you can bring about those changes in the world you want to bring about. So that's in a way going to be our primary term for sort of designating what it's like to be a body. It's to you experience it as your ability, as the eye can. So and the limits of your ability, things you can't do also. But it's in those terms that you experience your body. You can't fit through that space, but you can go up those stairs, right? But now I want to just explore a little bit more now a couple of the things that are involved in that. So the first point is that the body is the I can, phenomenologically speaking. And the second point then is to think about that notion that we can do things, right? So if you throw something at me, I can reach up and grab it, and so on. Or an example Merleau-Ponty uses somewhere else, if a mosquito stings me, I can, hit it or whatever. Merleau-Ponty says, so on that point, I want to read you something he says. This is right before that last quotation I read. This starts at the bottom of 175 and goes on to the top of 176. He says, "For the question is, how does the soul know this space, its own bodies, which it extends towards things, this primary here from which all the theirs will come? This space is not, like them, just another mode or specimen of the extended. It is the place of the body the soul calls mine, a place the soul inhabits." So I want to make a couple of points there. First, we're talking about the there, right? But as I was saying, going back to our experience of ourselves as subjects, right, we always are experiencing from a perspective. Another way of putting that is the there is oriented, and it's oriented in relationship to here. Right? So there's a way that there is no experience, you could say, apart from space. There is no experience apart from an original experience of the relationship of here and there, both their difference from each other and their inherent involvement with each other. Right? So there is only because here is. There is something. There is reality. There is a there only because I occupy a meaningful position which gives me both a perspective on it and is essentially a position in it. And so that's that primary here from which all the theirs will come. But in that sense, in as much as that's the precondition for there being any experience of space, it's not just another instance of it, right? It's the source. It's the originative context. Right? So that's why he says it's not just another mode or specimen of the extended. Right? It's the place the soul calls mine, and then he says that it's the place the soul inhabits. Right? So again, that should remind you of all of our talk about Heidegger and being at home and so on. And being in the world, he fundamentally just defined as inhabitation, and that's the most basic meaning of your body. It's aware, and it's the here, but that you inhabit. It's not an alien spot you might look at. It's the space that you are. But now let's continue that a little bit more, a little bit farther. I was saying, when the ball comes, I can reach up and grab it, or when a mosquito comes, I can smack it, right? That means, I inhabit my bodily space, the space in which my hand is in a different position from my shoulder and from my forehead and from my chest and whatever. I inhabit that spaced out reality spatially, in the sense that I kind of know where things are. Not at the level of a reflective cognition, but in the sense that my very eye, the eye who can catch, the eye who can smack a mosquito, my very eye is spaced. It's spatially extended. As a side note, remember that's how Derrida talked about writing. He talked about it as being spaced, right? As having differentiations in it that can't be effaced, and that's you as a body are spaced, right? You have differentiations that can't be effaced, and your eye, in as much as your eye is most fundamentally that I can function in the world, that I is itself spatially extended, right? That power to inhabit the world is rooted in the power that inhabits a body, and that's a power that is itself differentiated and distributed through this variety of hands, shoulders, and so on. And so, but so I inhabit that space, and that inhabitation means I live in it and I live from it, right? In hitting my shoulder, I know where my shoulder is, not at the level of a reflective cognition where I calculate, my hand is over here and my shoulder's over here, so I'm going to have to twist my hand at this angle and move it at this rate according to this line to get there. Like, none of that happens. It's in the very meaning of the way I inhabit my hand that it is related to the shoulder in this way, right? In his phenomenology of perception, Merleau-Ponty talks about this as essentially a relationship of envelopment, right? The different parts of your body are sort of envelop each other. That my shoulder is there in my hand, my nose is there in my hand when I scratch it. My mouth is there in my hand, and if I have to cough, I go, right? The very way I inhabit these different parts of my body has wrapped up in it an inhabitation of those other parts, right? That should remind you of Heidegger talking about equipment, and it's the idea that there's no such thing as an equipment, but there's a network. And so when you're in your workplace, you're just doing your thing, working on your project until you need to hammer a nail, and then the hammer rises up to salience and you grab it and you use it. But then as you get working on something else, it disappears again, and then the plane comes to prominence, or the level, or the screwdriver, whatever it is. The very way you inhabit the workspace is that all of those things are ready, and they're the meaning of each of them is not separated from the meaning of the others, though none of them is an explicit object of your attention while you're working on this thing. They're all receding in the background, but the idea of them being at the ready means whichever one you need will show up when you need it. Well, that's kind of what your body is like, right? Here's the hammer, and here's the plane, and here's the screwdriver, whatever. Like these things all will show up as you need them, and so each one of these sort of functional parts of your body has the others sort of implicit within it. And so in living in your body, you kind of know where your shoulder is. Your hand kind of knows where your shoulder is, and you know the relationship between the where of your hand and the where of the shoulder, analogously to the way that when you're in the workshop, you know where the hammer is and you know where those other things are, right? But so the point I want to get at there, so I guess actually, so the first point was the I can. The second point was then about this spatiality of our embodiment, and so first I wanted just to bring that out, that spatiality, but I wanted to bring out that spatiality, because it's an inhabitation, is a kind of knowledge, right? It's a knowledge that is spatial, or a being in space that is cognitive, for lack of a better word, right? Because the very way you inhabit this where involves knowing where the other wares are, right? But it's not that. But that knowing is not a reflective cognition, right? So it's neither the case that the spatiality of your body is just a bunch of things meaninglessly apart from each other, extended and distributed in a sort of a meaningless realm. And it's also not the case that your cognition is this detached thing. On the contrary, the spatiality of your body is an inseparable weaving together of extension and cognition, of awareness and bodily extension and distribution. So remember I was saying before, that writing sort of encourages in us a dualism of mind and body, but in fact that's rooted on something that is non-dual. And that's what I'm trying to show here, but picking up on Merleau-Ponty's remarks about space, spatiality of one's own body, that you can see in the very nature of the body as the I can, a reality, and the founding reality of our world, of our existence, of our experience, that is necessarily spatial cognizing and a cognitive spatiality, right? Something like that. So that was the second point. And now the third point, and I think the last one I want to make here at least, is another point he makes, and this is back at the beginning of his section 2 on page 162. So going back again to this idea of the I can and the fact that I operate in the world, think of the examples I gave. If something's falling on my son, I can go reach out and grab it or push him away or something like that, right? Well, what happens there is I see this thing falling and I reach out and stop him. But the point there is that there are these two very different orders of experience. At least that's how we normally think of them. One is vision and one is motion, right? I see the thing falling towards my son, or I see the ball that you're throwing towards me, and I move over to protect him, or I move my hand up to catch the ball, or whatever it is. Or I see the bus driving away and I run there. There, again, the thing I want you to notice is that, again, I guess there are a few subpoints here, but the first thing I want you to notice is that experientially, we don't exactly go through a series of different acts. Like, just as I don't see my hand and calculate where it is and calculate how to get to my shoulder, right? Just mosquito stings me, I just go like that. Similarly, I don't do one thing, which is have a visual experience of a bus going away and say, oh, there's a bus going away, and then think, oh, I must run. I'd better move my legs, and then think, okay, how am I going to get this knee to move? And that's not what happens. The seeing of the bus, perhaps without me ever even explicitly formulating to myself, oh, I'm seeing the bus going away, right? The seeing of it just brings out of me running. Or, even more striking examples might be if I look up and a ball's coming at my face, my hand goes up there to block it right away, or if somebody's swinging at me or something like that. Or, when I see my son sort of about to tumble off the table, this has happened. He was climbing on a table the other day, and I was saying, man, you shouldn't do that, you might fall, and he was climbing, and suddenly I just saw him tip, and without even thinking about it, I was out there grabbing him, and I got him just before he smacked his head on something, and I was happy about that. But the thing is, the act of seeing and the act of moving, they're not two acts. Those are two ways to describe one act. The visual perception and the motion are two sides of the way that a single kind of recognition is happening. Or another way to say that would be, in an important way, I perceive my son's falling by, or in and as. Let's say by. I perceive my son's falling by reaching out to get him. I perceive the ball coming at my face by reaching up to get it, right? The the act of perception doesn't have these different stages, one visual and a second one that is a chosen consequence of that motor, but rather the perception is simultaneously a visual and a motor phenomenon. I like some other examples too that are more everyday. Like if I'm walking with my friend and talking and we come up to some stairs, my hand will go out to the handrail as I walk up the stairs effectively automatically as we talk. But I say automatically, but it's not exactly automatic. I had to see it, right? I had to walk over there and I was talking, and without ever noticing it, I saw the handrail and my hand went out to get it. And by the time I got to the steps, I might not even really have ever even noticed that I reached out and grabbed the handrail, but I do it all the time, right? There, the seeing and the reaching out are one thing. So anyway, so I said that was the first of the points I wanted you to notice about the seeing and the motion, right? That there aren't separate cognitive acts there. There's one thing that happens, and the perception is simultaneously visual and motor. The second thing I want you to notice about that is that the visual and the motor are things that we would typically dualize basically the same way we dualize mind and body, right? Vision is part of how a self-conscious subject gets some kind of cognitive information. And motion is how, a physical body moves in space, right? So one is on the side of mind, essentially. One is on the side of body, basically, or thought and space, the terms used at another point. And those would typically be, dualized. They'd be parts of different orders of reality. But what we're seeing is that that's, again, not the case. So just as I was saying, in this body as a bit of lived space, you can't really separate those two. Well, similarly, in everyday action and in everyday perception, you can't separate those two. Indeed, just to pick up on those terms I just used, you can't really separate action and perception as two different things. To perceive the handrail is to grab it, right? So perception already is action, and action, when I, whatever it is that you see me doing, walking down the street or whatever, like that action is itself an intelligent, responsive thing. While I'm talking with you, but I'm walking down the street. But while that's happening, my body's movement is adjusting to unevenness in the pavement, and I'm actually going over there. And so with talking with you and without even thinking about it, I'm going to turn around, turn to the right when I go down the alleyway or whatever it is. The very way my body moves involves recognizing and understanding things, right? So action is in that way has perception built into it, and in the other example I gave, perception in a way has action built into it. So, we would tend to dualize vision and motion, or perception and action. This is very much the same way we would tend to dualize mind and body. But when we take ourselves back phenomenologically to our living experience of the body, we see that we can't separate those things. The very origin of all of our behavior has those two things as different sides of a single reality. Right? So that's a little bit now just to bring us back to the reality of the body. And one of the things that I especially wanted to do because of Merleau-Ponty's essay, one of the things I especially wanted to do was to bring up these two issues of movement in space and talking about the spatiality of the body and vision. Because now what we're going to go on to do next is look at what he has to say about painting. And the thing that's going to be a central issue there is essentially the perception of distance, right? The way that space shows up in vision. So that's going to be our next topic.